Thank you.
All right. So thank you everyone for being here. I know it's the end of the day. We're all tired. Hopefully you've all had a great day. I'd like to think that they've saved the best for last, but I know that's not true. There's been a lot of awesome people that have presented today. So certainly happy to follow in their footsteps. So we're here today to talk about Venemy, which is a tool that we created for analyzing Venmo. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kick it off, and then I'm going to let Neil take over. So who am I? I'm a red team operator at Millennium Corporation, where I get to do some really cool things with various organizations within the DoD. So if you're interested in job opportunities, what we have to offer, certainly happy to talk about that. Credentials up here, if you care about those, and a really super nerdy 15 minutes of fame. Claim to fame is I was in the Raspberry Pi magazine for literally the nerdiest thing you could imagine. It involved Magic the Gathering, Lego, a Raspberry Pi, and optical character recognition. So if you get really bored, go look it up. It's a super, super nerdy thing.
So I'm Neil. Nothing as cool as Michael. I'm following his coattails. But I work as a senior analyst for a large consulting company focused on big data analytics and threat hunting, looking at net flow data and things like that. Those are the other certs, but biggest claim to fame is I was in the DerbyCon SECTF last year, had a lot of fun there, and hopefully I'm going to DEF CON to do it this year. So data tells us stories. We're all OSINTers here, and we all know that the more data we pull in, the happier we are, and the more we understand about the target set. So I'll give a little shout out to Malicious Life, the great podcast, but they talk about in one of them the large-scale security breaches for the credit card bureaus and things like that, where they used to aggregate data and give it to the companies that wanted to know about the consumers and the customers. But here we kind of turn it around a little bit, where we're taking financial data, finding patterns and behaviors and trustworthiness, and using that to look at the consumers looking at consumers, or an adversary looking at a smaller level target. So the things that we like to know about people from their financial data is not necessarily their trustworthiness in a loan or things like that, but like, are they traveling? So this person's looking for a passport. Are they getting married, changing a name? Other patterns, now I know your birthday, and who might be your close friends. Roommates, this is a very common piece coming up. There's been lots of academic research on some of the Venmo public API data feeds that have come out over the past year and a half. They've done a lot of great analysis, but they don't share their tools or the data that they got, so we're giving you that today. And then they had over, I think, almost 20 million things for roommates and rent and pieces like that. So recurring patterns over time as you put on people's transactions the same time of the month, that they have a special emoji that they share. You can find roommates if they're not in regular property records. When you start to look at insider threat, you can see people who have gambling problems, and one of these guys, you can see people just back and forth and exchanging money all the time for sports betting over Venmo. There's other things that you can get very definitive pieces like the rent, a passport, and then there's other pieces that are kind of the comments are just garbage, but you still know that there's that relationship of a time and a place and a transaction between two people. Other relationships, child support, things get very personal that people just seem to put out there. I found this other one we'll talk about at the end too, but Uber, it's a short, I'm lame, I have 2 kids, so it's slang for Uber. I don't know why people actually do that, because it's easier to type ER on the keyboard than to go back with your left hand and type A, but I guess that's shorthand nowadays, so we'll go with it. We also saw, and it's amazing to me, the amount of data that people push out there. There are lots of individuals that have over 10 plus transactions on Venmo a day, and it's just bleeding everything that they do, every time and place, every person that they go with. So, I mean, these individuals, as I'm sitting at home at night watching the feeds and trying to find good targets for our work, yes, we do think that your constant Venmoing back and forth is ridiculous, 4 times in 3 hours. So to nerd out on the numbers real quick, looking at PayPal, looking at Venmo. So Venmo has 40 million users as of last year. They haven't published the new data for this year. And that's just a rough estimate based on some of the other academic research. PayPal does publish their user count, that's 267 million, just to give a relative size. And Venmo is part of PayPal, so they're not 2 separate companies, but looking at them at different subsets. When you look at Venmo individually, they have grown 70 to 80% year over year, and that's in total volume of transactions, and then also in dollar amount of transactions. So they're kind of catching up to PayPal, and PayPal really likes them as a sub company and the money that they're making from it. PayPal grows at 20 to 25% a year, so it's drastically smaller, but still, still good. The reason I bring this up is half of the user base last year was public, and it's probably diminished since they've gotten such negative press. But when you look at the upcoming year, they're supposed to do 100 billion with a B in transaction dollars. So even if you got a small part of that for a data set that's public, is very useful and very worthwhile. And the other piece that makes the Venmo data interesting to us and useful for open source investigations, for pen testing, pulling things together, and for law enforcement investigations, finding and tracking people is, on average, Venmo transactions are $60, so it's very small. So that gets very close to the daily life of an individual. When you're buying food, who you're paying $15 for your yoga class, if you're doing some small photography thing, all of those little pieces are part of your daily life that are what you're moving to, what you're moving to do, where you're going, who you're talking to. The larger transactions happen with Zelle. People use that as very similar to PayPal, but their average transaction is $300, and PayPal's is a lot higher. So those transactions occur less in your life and provide me less information about you. So that's why we kind of like Venmo more than the other data sets. So it's growing, it's huge, and the volume in close proximity to your daily life of where I want to be if I'm trying to spearfish, if I'm trying to craft an email, or if I'm trying to track or find somebody like the TraceLab CTF, I can get closer by looking at this type of public feed for data. So we bring all this data in, and it's just large-scale information, but at some point it tips over to that form of intelligence, and we can operationalize it and use that for our operations, our end goal. So, and that usually results in either crafting an email or something that's going to be most likely to be clicked on. We want everybody to click the link, open the email, open the attachment to support our engagements, or we want somebody to have that kind of slip up and pop up if we're doing a missing investigation. So I'll turn it over to Michael for the code portion of the presentation.
So as Dill mentioned, this is not a new problem. People have been writing about this for a while now, and so there have been some code releases out there that you can use, and there's been some analysis that's been done. So we try to provide some code and some examples of using it in Neo4j, so doing some simple graph analysis. So this repo will be released in the next couple of days. We're just wrapping up the code, and so that'll be public for you guys to go and to look at. So there's a URL. Again, this will come out in a couple of days. It's written in Python 3. As much as we love Python 2.7, it's going to be about to become end of life, so we need to make that switch. There's an unauthenticated version and authenticated version. So if you're super uber paranoid, there's a module for you. If you don't care, there's a module for you too. Like I said, we're using Neo4j. I just chose that because that seems to be one of the more popular languages for doing graph analysis. And I've actually used my own profile for a lot of this stuff, but I try to redact anything that may have been my friends, related to my friends or someone else we use. So, so one of the really creepy things about Venmo, and I can vouch for this in just a second. I'll give you an example, but whenever you're importing this, it imports your contacts, and if they use Venmo, then it automatically connects this person. So we had an insider threat issue once upon a time where we were trying to connect an individual to certain other individuals, and so we did the typical social media searching and saw that they had a lot of lockdown profiles. And so we're like, well, good for them for practicing good OPSEC. But we looked at Venmo, and it tied that individual. They used their profile was public, and it tied them to a lot of people that we had suspicion upon. So we were actually able to confirm those connections by doing that type of analysis. And so if you've got friends who are trying to be super secret squirrel and your profile is public, it may show that connection. So definitely be cognizant of that. Also, Facebook. There's a lot of sites where you can get Facebook IDs, but if you're trying to, like for example, the TraceLab CTF today is if you're trying to confirm an individual, this is their actual account, you can look at the graph ID from Facebook.com, and you can look at their Facebook profile and actually make sure that those accounts are actually linked to each other. and that's actually parsed out in the code as well. So when you're doing your analysis, you should be able to see that. So, so here's just a couple of screenshots of some of the options you can do. So if you have just a username, like mine's in potatoes, you can just plug that in as a user and it'll return some really basic information. If you're looking to do friends of mine, my profile's private, so you won't get that. But if it was, you could see some friends. By the way, this is the authenticated module. You can look at transactions I've had. Or you can do TAC A, and it'll just pull everything back for you. And one of the things I think is a really cool feature if you're trying to build out the social network is the crawling feature. So if you go, you can crawl one level of my friends, and you crawl their friends as well. The next thing you know, you have a big graph, and you can do that type of analysis to build out those relationships. And we get a little fancy here too. If you want to download all the pictures, you can also add pictures to your notes to make things a lot easier to analyze, and we'll show that in just a second. So, so those are the options for doing the authenticated module. And there's some files that it outputs, and you've got there are the pictures that are downloaded when you're doing this. So to show you what I'm talking about, so here's just me and a couple of my friends. So here's the graph analysis. This is literally just one simple query. This took a few seconds to run and pull back. So you see myself, and then you see three of my close friends from high school, and so we have a bunch of friends that are in common from high school and college. So that makes sense. If we do more commonality. These are ones that we just have in common. Again, you can look at the bottom. That's actually Cypher language, and Neo4j is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. So that's those are some analysis we can do between friends. This is my friend's transactions. So clearly they did a fantasy football league and left me out. So I'm going to have a conversation about that. That's okay. I'll forgive them. But this is important because if you find yourself, and for example, in an insider thread scenario or some other similar scenario, and you're trying to link who's buying what from whom, it could be interesting. As I mentioned, there's analysis that's been done, and they found a guy who constantly was selling drugs, and so they did analysis that showed, little pot leads and other things. I don't know if it was legal in that state or not, but people were buying drugs on Venmo, and you could pretty much build out this entire drug network. So it was kind of interesting to see that. So again, this is just one simple query that you can do, and I'll post all those queries to the repo, so it makes it easy for you guys. So this is the example of friend of a friend, and what's interesting is the red circle up at the top. I know it's kind of hard to see the little nodes, but those are actually two of my friends that have never met each other that have a ton of friends in common. So that's kind of interesting. That's not really a security thing, but if you are trying to do some type of analysis, that could be interesting to bring that to light. The black circle is it's a huge cluster of friends that we all have in common, again, from high school and college. So as I mentioned, if you do have a target in mind or a couple of targets in mind, then it would be interesting to put that together and start looking at those clusters to try to find commonality. And if we're getting super fancy, we can also add pictures, and that's actually really simple to do too. It's just a simple plugin you add with the Neo4j, and so I've documented that as well in the repo. So if that helps visualize things for you, then that's also an option. So again, what are the use cases for some of this? So again, if we're in an insider thread scenario, this could be useful to find those correlations. When you think in terms of phishing, think about something like Uber, for example. So if you have somebody that's buying Uber on Venmo, and you can see, maybe send them a transaction dispute, because Lord knows we hate those things. So you threw up in my car and you owe me X amount of money. Like, that didn't happen. So that could be a likely scenario. And so I think do you have more with that?
Yeah, so one of the pretexts that may or may not have been pulled together was the Uber transactions. So these are the other piece about Venmo is it's instantaneous. So there's no warrants, and you have to wait for it to come back. There's no data processing. You're not waiting on anything else. It shows up within seconds of the transaction occurring. So you're close to that time in that event. The Uber situation was most of the people, you're either a Lyft user or an Uber user, right? Some people breach between the two, but over time I can see if you're using Uber or if you're using Lyft and Venmo usually going back and forth with your friends. Picking one, if I see that you're receiving an Uber payment, maybe that was a ride that just occurred, I'm now going to watch, and with simple background checks for adults through a paywall, you can get an email account and a phone number. Those are generally fairly easy to find. And then with the email and the phone number, I'll send you a text and I'll send you an email saying that the driver that you just had your Uber with said he's putting an unclean car dispute against you, and click this link to, like, I've never gotten one because I've never had one filed on me. Maybe not, but click and either dispute this charge or pay the fee. So it happened right then and there. It's a small $50 charge. You're immediately invested in the situation. It's on your mind, and you're going to either click the link or open the email to see what's going on. Uber lets you log in with Gmail or Facebook, so then it's a great way to gain those types of creds if you can clone the page, which is very, very common for cloning and phishing. And then you have IP address, user agent, anything like that that you want to get, and potentially if you get really lucky, you'll get the creds. So that's one of the pretexts that can be applied from this, because you're getting able to know your target at a very close level, and you're able to get past a lot of unknown pieces of information. They have an Uber, when it occurred, and if they were sharing it with somebody and they were the one that paid for it. So that's just one of the pretexts. There's lots that can come out from this. We hope that you all use the tool and apply it to whatever task you have, or run it on yourself just to see how it works. And then we love any feedback through the repo. It's on Michael's page, and hopefully you guys can take it and run with it. We will open up for some questions. I know it's been a long day, and once again, on behalf of both of us, thanks again for staying here and listening to us. So any questions? Yep.
My experience in Venmo is close to the United States. Have you guys seen any research about Venmo operating in other countries where?
I have not. I actually don't know I don't think it's in other currencies. I'm not 100% positive. All of the stuff in the hours and hours that I've watched on Venmo, the feed updating slowly, has been in English, some Spanish, mostly, but the 40 million users has all been US based. PayPal is worldwide, but I think Venmo is pretty focused on US or English based users. Yes?
Did you guys look at Cash App at all?
We did not look at Cash App. So this is done in our part-time. So that's definitely an avenue to go down. I think financial data has a huge impact on how we can understand our target sets more. So love to look at that. Michael, if you got stuff.
I was just going to say, so Venmo is a focus because everything's public by default. So the API, you can actually go ahead unauthenticated. And even when you do authenticate, all you've got to do is provide a token. You actually have access to all the API.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my focus. Cash App.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. No, it's a totally separate company, a separate app. They don't have a public data feed, and you need a whole new account and everything. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the other thing about Venmo that's very, very unique is that you can do up to $300 in transactions per week without any authentication or like proof that you're an actual person. So it's used a lot by nefarious characters to do transactions because you don't need anything else. PayPal, you need a utility bill, you need a driver's license, you need a passport number or something that is real, that's traceable by police. Venmo, no. So if you're using a credit card, it won't be, or you have any of your other bank accounts aren't tied to the Venmo public feed. And even if I have $500 in my Venmo account and I move it to my private bank, that does not show up in the public feed. But your transactions with everyone else will show up in the public feed if your feed is public. If it's private, we just get your username at Venmo, your picture, and user ID. So we tried to figure that out. As of last year, the academic researcher that pulled down all of the API feed said there was around 18.5 million out of an estimated 40 million accounts that had a public setting. My assessment now is there's more than 40 million accounts, but I think that reduced because of the, whole awareness and Venmo sending you a notification of how you can change it to private, but the default is still public. But I don't know the number now. You could try to quantify it if you watched for like a month and you pulled down every account and you took a volume of the accounts and did some statistical extrapolation, but I'm not exactly sure. Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Highly recommend, if you do use Venmo, go private. If you don't, just use PayPal. I think use a reputable bank, per se, a financial institution. Yes? Or in the front, yep. Yes, you.
So if you make yours private and the person you're working with doesn't get it in private, how much do you see?
I think the whole transaction is not seen, if I'm correct. It doesn't say like one person to unknown. It is not.
So if the unprivate person is paying me that's private, it disappears?
Yeah, if one
Yeah.
has made the transaction private, then you shouldn't see it.
Yeah, it doesn't show up.
I was wondering if it would differ if the originating person was unprivate versus the originating. Because if I'm private and I originated the transaction, does that keep it private versus if someone is unprivate, is public, and they're originating that transaction?
No, yes. So from the data that we have seen, if one side is private, the whole thing does not show up in the public feed. Either way. So, either way. I would not even classify myself as a coder at all, and it's very, very easy. So yeah, there's a, we've gone through the, in the repo, there's a how-to guide. There's a how-to guide to find the API token. So please don't be daunted by anything that it's asking you to do. There's a step-by-step in Firefox how to find the token. It's like 3 clicks in the GUI, very easy. And then there's 4 or 5 commands. After 2 minutes poking around with it, it's very easy to use. And then the outputs, like Michael showed, are CSV files. So you could open it in Excel if you wanted to. And then with the larger data sets, you can do it in Excel, but you should probably move into Neo4j to kind of visualize it a little bit better. Or Tableau, since if you're familiar. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a business where I sell a service to millennials, and I
Mhm.
started using Venmo because that's what they wanted me to use.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me that their notion of privacy is completely different.
Mhm.
So they're sort of, kind of ahead of the curve, if you will, and they just sort of have given up, trying to pretend that they're going to be having any sense of privacy. And so
Mhm.
there's that thought, but then on the other hand, I look at, this immersive consuming of data now that we have all sorts of tremendous tools to consume just petabytes of data. We have
Mhm.
license plate readers, the lights can read when we're going by. All this data is there and is being, analyzed already. So
Mhm.
how do you see this really working out within even a very short period of time in terms of being able to ever not have data be out there that people could, sort of use to put together a picture of us? We don't control much of the data that's out there about ourselves and our comings and goings anymore anyhow. So I really don't really know how the sort of privacy conversation is realistically going to play out in the future. And I was wondering, I guess, what your sense is on that.
So, no, I agree. The younger you are, the more apt you are to just kind of let your information go. I think also people look at it as a microtransaction and they're saying, oh, me giving you $5 for a beer is not a big deal. You can't do anything with that. But then all the large scale analytics of seeing beers over time, you drank 45 beers last week, only during the weekend, that's a lot of beers out, not to mention what's at your house. The employer you now are a higher risk for medical insurance or something like that. But I don't know if there's a way around it. I think it's just that individual user's choice. Looking at it as a microtransaction makes it more free, and you're not as harvested or invested in it. But at least with this one, you should be able to just flick it private and make it harder for adversaries, and then make yourself more secure. But I agree with millennials. They look at it as a smaller piece, and then I'm actually a millennial, but non-security millennials look at it differently.
It's hopefully there could at least be a model in place to say, hey, this is how we operate, be very forthcoming, and here's, issues with making it public.
It's also, it's at the juncture of the privacy security
Mhm.
conversation, that's really what you're doing.
I mean, it's a social thing too. So people interact on Facebook and Twitter and Snapchat. This is how they interact with people. It's easier for them to interact with Venmo, where they can actually put in a message to their friend for everything that they do and talk with emojis in everything, vice actually just, doing your card or paying cash.
As this picks up, popularity picks up,
Mm-hmm.
how does one prevent themselves from being labeled as a drug dealer based on the emojis they use? What if something, this is the question we all need.
Yes. So
How do you not get labeled as a drug dealer even though, you're not?
Oh yeah. So if you really want to check, if you really want to check, Department of Homeland Security puts out, I think it's weekly or monthly. They put out the slang terms for all the street drugs, and they put out emojis used and symbols so that local law enforcement can use that to find bad people. Department of Homeland Security. So if you want, it might be a subset like ATF. Yes. So I was going to say if you want to read that each week or each month, then you could say have a do not use list. But or yeah, it's a big list. It's a big list. So yeah, I mean, or just don't make it public. That's another way to avoid.
It's funny you say that because one of the stats was I think it was between 35 and 40% of all millennials admitted to buying drugs via Venmo.
Oh wow, yeah.
A drug dealer once asked me if he should use Venmo, and I said, don't.
Yeah.
Use new words.
New words. I mean, over time, patterns, filtering. If you have a high volume of transactions with non-friends, then it's more likely a business account, or like things to filter. You pull down my profile. If I had a lot of transactions, drop out all of the stuff that I have with my friends. That's stuff that I purchased from external parties, and you can go down that rabbit hole, and then you say, turn all of that off. Just tell me everything that I've had with my friends, and go down that rabbit hole for those close relationships. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Build on this because your buddies, you have a fantasy football league. Your buddies have a fantasy football league. They think you suck at it, which is crazy because they probably should. But the reality is, and I know we have like 1 second left.
Yeah.
The reality is that has to be happening, which is the equivalent of buying or selling drugs in terms of like it's probably more cash, smaller bits. Hey, $25 in this week, you in? $25 in this week.
Oh yeah.
That's what I mean.
Yeah, you can do 300 a week, 5,000 a month in Venmo with nothing, because that's the threshold for financial transactions and felonies is $5,000 a month. 300 a week is what Venmo put in. 5,000 a month, I think, is an actual federal like SEC thing, because then you start. Yeah, I think five, because 5 is the level for felonies of theft and things like that, and movement of money. So, and then it's like you have to file taxes if you do 5. So that's the threshold. But 5,000 is a lot a month, right? If you're living on the street, $5,000 drug dealing is pretty good, for a street corner guy. Yeah, I'm talking low level dude, right? Street corner guy. As many as you want, because there's no authentication. It's just it's just for any email. You don't even need a burner phone number. So how many email accounts can you create in an hour? So.
The crazy thing too is if you just use an email, like it automatically authenticates you, and you already get an API token. So yeah, so you get an API token right away.
Yeah.
You use that for 30 minutes. You actually have to provide validation with code to code. Start it again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You're really trying to be really super squirrel, and that's the way to do it. But
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, keep creating new accounts and keep it under the radar.
Yep.
Which, yeah, how long? I don't know how many drugs are smart.
Yeah.
They're kind of busy business service.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we have the closing ceremony. We'll be here after getting drinks because they're free and you don't have to pay with them for Venmo. So we'll see you guys after the closing ceremony. I once again appreciate and thank you guys all for being here. Thanks again.